What's the difference between managing IBMI in-house and outsourcing it, and which option actually performs better long term? In this episode, we're going to break it down in simple terms so you can make the right decision for your business. From cost and control to security and staffing, you'll walk away knowing exactly which approach fits your situation and what to do next. Welcome back to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards, where we challenge outdated thinking and help you make smarter ERP decisions. Today, we're tackling a question we hear all the time. Should you manage your IBMI in-house or outsource it? We've already talked about the risks in IBMI environments, whether that's security gaps, aging staff, or that false sense of stability. But now we're taking it one step further, because once you understand the risks, the next question is, what do you actually do about it? So today we're going to compare both approaches side by side and simplify this decision. And we're joined today by Tim Kramer, our leading expert in IBMI. He's been here at the company for a very long time. So Tim, how are you doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself, Nate?
Loving it. We have some nice weather here in Chicago today, and I'm very excited to take advantage of it. So let's start with the foundation. What's the actual difference between managing IBMI in-house and outsourcing?
There are a lot of differences in between the two. Of course, in-house, you have your own complete staff. You're controlling that hardware that's within your data center. You're controlling more or less everything within the stack. Where on an outsourced type environment, you can pick and choose which pieces that you want to keep and control and which pieces you would like someone else to manage or take care of for you.
Right. So maybe let's go a little bit further into it. What does the IBMI in-house environment truly look like?
The first piece would be the staff, the employees that you have to manage that system and the applications that that system uses. So that could be the infrastructure team. It could be your IBMI administrators. It may or may not be a database administrator. You would also, of course, have the infrastructure team for the backend connectivity to it. You may have business analysts. You may have, application specialists and for specific applications or silos that they handle or control.
So it seems like that's a lot of people on staff and a lot of people that you have to pay the salary of. Am I right in that?
You are exactly right. That is very common with an in-house environment.
Mhm. So what would you say the main advantages are of keeping it in-house?
The main advantage, of course, that you have total control of the complete stack. So you don't have to worry about um, any outside entity, making those decisions for you or making those decisions on behalf. You control the stack from top to bottom, being the hardware that you're actually running on, the hardware when it gets replaced, the application that you're using, the application when it goes through its upgrade process. You control that whole stack top to bottom when it's in-house.
So where do you typically see the challenges in that model?
One of the big challenges is staffing, as you kind of started to mention, where um, that you have to keep that knowledge in house. So if you have, members that are close to retirement or a turnover in staffing, you have to be able to keep that knowledge in house because you're 100 responsible for that application that's hosted on that specific hardware. And also you run into these silos where one specific person knows one application where another person within the staff knows another application that runs on that piece of hardware. So that becomes a pain point for a lot of customers. There's also, let's say that you hit a point in time where the business has a large growth or a spurt in business. That is usually very difficult for an in-house type environment because you cannot scale as quickly in the hosted environment. Let's say that you run a business that sells shoes, right? Or something like that, where you know that 90% of your business happens right before Christmas, between August and November. That's when most of the business occur. In them type of environments, it's very difficult to be able to predict what that surge is going to be before that Christmas season. Also, it can be a problem in the SMB market, run into a problem with coverage, where you have a small staff just because of the size of the company, and staffing becomes an issue, to cover vacations, to cover them extra off hours, to cover weekends, and also if a new project comes on, where you don't have the staffing to take on the new project and also be able to maintain the application on the day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And it's also difficult to maybe hire new people when those times of the year come around, or if you do have people that are going on vacation, you're not going to just hire somebody for 2 weeks. And it's also very difficult to even find somebody out there in the workforce that could just walk in and understand your environments, because obviously we talked about this on the last podcast of it's just a shrinking workforce in general. There's a lot of aging people that to backfill some of this, it's not really possible in that quick of a turnaround. But what really changes when you look at outsourcing? Like, what is the main difference there?
What happens is certain responsibility that the customer chooses um, shifts from being in-house to that managed service provider, kind of looking at the stack. That could be just the hardware that the application runs on, that could be turned over to the managed service provider, or it could be the operating system and the hardware. And it also could be the application. When you kind of look at the application, you can look at that multiple ways. Let's say that you need to upgrade that application or put on a technology refresh, like what happened within E1. That responsibility for that upgrade could be given or turned over to the managed service provider, or it could be the opposite, that you want to retain that upgrade and perform that in-house with your staff, where the day-to-day responsibility gets turned over to the managed service provider. One of the things that's a definite plus when you go to a managed service provider is, instead of having one person that is responsible for that specific topic or that specific application or that piece of hardware, you end up with a team of specialists. So you broaden the horizon on how you can tap into them skills that are available to you. Also, when you go to managed service provider, you get 24/7 support. Instead of worrying about that employee that is getting called at 2 in the morning, get woke up. Now you have a team sitting there waiting for that phone call if it needs to be made. Um, Another thing that usually happens is you standardize processes. In-house, we use a product called Process Street, that them specific uh, practices that a customer puts in place, that is all documented. So if Joe is on vacation this week and Bob is covering, Bob can follow that exact same process, and there is no loss in coverage whatsoever.
So, what would you say the core benefits are for outsourcing?
Um, it really reduces the dependency on a specific individual, because you have that coverage no matter if Bob's on vacation, right? Um, Improved security is definitely one. The monitoring definitely comes into play, because that 24/7 staff is always there, um, making sure that application is up 100% of the time. It allows the customer also to focus more on their business, rather than having to worry about that back end system, or worry about that application because it's being taken care of. And instead, they can, spend more time on their business and improving or increasing the business that they have. Also, the expertise that you tap into. Um, to give you an example, I mean, we have a gentleman on staff that's written multiple red books for IBM, and you would have, if you was hosting with ERP suites, you would be able to tap into an individual like that. So you end up with a whole team of specialists rather than one specific person that's handling that one application.
Yeah. So, if we're talking about the shortcomings of outsourcing IBMI, is it mostly just losing control, or is there something a little deeper to it?
It's not really losing control. What it is it's the decision process kind of changes, because let's say that you want to perform A, and you have to let's say that you want the managed service provider to take on that responsibility. So it goes through a change request type process, rather than, you could, if you was a staff of, like 5 people and the manager's told, that specific employee to perform that specific process, it would just be done, right? Where if you deal with a managed service provider, it usually has to go some type of like change management process that we use internally before that specific request could be taken care of.
Mhm. So maybe to simplify that in this segment a little bit more, like keeping IBMI in-house gives you complete and total control, but outsourcing gives you scalability and support. And the real difference isn't just who manages it, it's how resilient and future ready your environment actually is. Am I right in that?
You are right.
All right. So let's take this one step further because most companies don't make this decision based on theory, they make it based on real world pressure. When companies are deciding between in house and outsourcing, what do the real differences look like when it comes to cost, when it comes to risk, and even performance?
One of the biggest things, of course, is the cost of the employees, the salaries that you have to pay for that specialized individual or that talent that employee has. That is usually very difficult, especially because you're competing against other companies for that skill set that employee has. Or, of course, when it's with a managed service provider, you receive that whole team and that skill as part of that contract that's put in place. Um, when it's in-house, training usually becomes an issue because anytime that you hire that new employee, of course, you have to do that in-house training, especially for IBMI. It's harder and harder to find those individuals that have that skill set that you want to bring in-house. The time to onboard that individual um, can become an issue where it makes much more sense to put it with a hosting company because you already have that staff in place. Backup coverage is definitely a problem, especially if you're a smaller staff. If it's a very large staff, it's not as much of a problem. But in the SMB market, that has always been an issue. Uh, the cost of downtime is huge, especially for any customer. That is a huge unknown sometimes, where they haven't either tested their processes, or if a downtime does occur, or they have inefficiencies in their processes, but they're just not aware of them.
Mhm. So maybe let's go a little bit deeper on costs. What does a typical team look like in terms of cost for an in-house company?
The costs vary immensely. It could be from the smallest of small, where you have 3, 4 end users on an IBM partition, and you're talking in the hundreds of dollars per month. Instead of you're talking on the other basis or the high end, you're talking hundreds of $1,000s per month for a very, very large, complex type configuration. So it varies so much. It really depends on what resources need to be assigned to that specific partition or partitions for that client, depending on what their needs are. Um, Also, if you think about what pieces you want to pick in regards to the the team that the managed services company has, as in, is it just managing that hardware? Is it managing the operating system in the hardware? Is it managing also that application? And also, is it actually performing the updates and upgrades and enhancements of that application? In-house, we have a whole team of E1 CNCs and also programmers and developers. So if you look at that, where literally we're handling a customer's ERP system from top to bottom, handling that whole stack with a team of experts. Um, it takes that whole responsibility of the customer, and the customer is able to, once again, to grow their business rather than worrying about that back end ERP system.
Yeah. So these different people that would be on the team, what would you say the average salary you would kind of see for them? Like for a
It,
junior analyst versus maybe a more senior level person?
you could start with, because if you start at the bottom, you're probably talking a help desk person. You're probably talking that $20 an hour type job. And then you're also looking at consultants that are several $100s per hour that are on our staff. So it varies widely,
Mhm.
what that salary would be for that individual. If you take an analyst, you're talking, a six-figure income or salary for that individual. So yes, it varies quite a bit.
Yeah. So, how does outsourcing compare from a cost perspective? Is it a lot cheaper or is it more the same?
One of the greatest benefits of that is exactly what your monthly cost is going to be. Where when it's in house, you're going through that replacement cycle, be it 3 years or 5 years, you end up with this usually a budgeting issue, when that comes around to the next time, depending on if you're purchasing or if you're leasing. But you have a predictable monthly cost. You always know what that's going to be. Also, you don't have to worry about that training budget. That goes away where you have to bring in that new employee. You have to, bring them up to speed and, train them on that specific application or the role that they will be filling. That hiring burden, which we know is becoming more and more of a problem in the IBM field, is completely taken care of also. Excuse me. When you look at all these factors, it usually ends up being a lower total cost compared to the 100% in-house environments.
Yeah. And it's even a lower cost when you factor in risk. So, what about risk? What are the biggest differences between an in house or outsourced?
The biggest risk is usually tied to specific individuals, where a specific individual has a skill set that is not, no cross training has been done to other individuals within the team, or there is gaps in coverage, when a specific individual has a skill, needs to go on vacation, or, has a special event or a life-changing event that there is no one to backfill that area. That is a huge risk for a company, especially when you're relying on that one specific individual or multiple individuals, and that training has not occurred or that knowledge has not been transferred to other individuals. Um, the Another item is monitoring and proactive management. Usually with a managed service provider where there is a staff on there 24/7, watching that application or checking that application, all night long when you're in bed sleeping. Um, that is a huge risk for a lot of customers. And there's also, usually with a managed service provider, they will fill them security gaps that a lot of customers in the SMB market have.
Yeah, there's that better monitoring. There's the proactive management that's external. And it's not, you don't have to think about it every single day because you hired somebody to think about that every single day. And you're right, with the gaps, there's also a gap of security when it comes to that. When people are sleeping, there's no one monitoring your system 24 by 7. But with a lot of these outsourced models, you see that every great outsourcing for IBMI will have a 24 by 7 monitoring team. Am I right in that, or are there companies out there that don't?
You're exactly right. All managed service providers have 24/7 teams.
Exactly. It's something that they hang their hats on of your your system will be secure and will be monitored at all times, which is great because yes, people should take vacations. They should take that Italy trip. I'm taking an Italy trip later this year, but I know that I will be okay because we have monitoring. So, how does performance and reliability kind of compare between these two?
Um, Usually with the in-house, it can be inconsistent, um, because usually performance a lot of times is put on the back burner, as I would call it. What's
Mm.
more important is to keep everything running for the business. Where performance sometimes it's when you have spare time that becomes uh, a hot topic as brought to the forefront, where with hosting service providers that's something that's monitored all the time, and alerts are set up or warnings are set up. So if an application, instead of that end user that sitting in China and the RPR system is setting in the United States, and we're all of a sudden seeing a latency that's too high, where that would be picked up immediately and start to be looked at, where usually if it's in-house, that a lot of times will fall in that gap. Um, Usually the outsource environments are more standardized because
Mhm.
one other thing, of course, is the equipment is replaced on a regular basis. And also they'll have multiples instead of just having one system, they'll have multiple of that same system. So things become very standardized in that type of environment. Um, you usually end up with faster response times just because of the size of the teams, where that managed service provider usually has a much larger staff that's taking care of that specific infrastructure 24 by 7. So it
Yeah.
becomes more of a proactive type model than a reactive type model, I would say.
Yeah. And most of these outsourced teams are built to monitor a bunch of different systems at the same time, which is a good thing because a lot of those people have been through whatever a company can go through. I was talking to one of our monitoring people that we have at this company. I was like, "Oh, is there ever anything that you see for the first time?" And of course, our friend Chris Egan was like, not anymore. But when he first started, of course, there's some new stuff. But he's been around long enough that every single company has gone through something and he's been there and helped them get through it. So he's ready to do it for everything. And I know that every company out there has a similar person that has seen a thing or two. So, where do companies tend to underrate or underestimate the difference?
One of the things that I've seen happen multiple times within companies is they overestimate the capabilities of a specific team or a staff member, or let's say that a member retired and they think that the next teammate up can take over the responsibilities of that, where they're either not seasoned enough or they was not cross-trained enough or enough knowledge was not given to that person to take on that responsibility. So that happens quite often where that they just overestimate it. Um, Also, I've seen where it is the exact opposite, where they underestimate the risk that they have in house. So they don't do enough analysis on the potential pitfalls for their team. Um, we talked about a little bit earlier about scalability or the option to be able to scale them systems instantly. Give you an example of a customer in house where recently they had a big, how would I say, a big turn or increase in business over a very short couple days. So they came to us. We was instantly able to add additional processor and memory to specific ERP applications and take care of that short-term burst. And they were very appreciative just because we was able to address that in no time whatsoever, instead of the rest of their business being impacted by a short burst in business. Um, One of the things that some customers I've seen before is they assume that since they're not seeing issues or they're not aware of that specific issue, that they have no problems or no risks. So,
Yeah. And that's something we talked about on the last podcast of thinking that something hasn't broken yet means that it's stable. It's never the truth, but if you want to learn more about that, go back. It was about a month ago that we released it. It's called IBMI Reality Check. Plug in my own podcast on the podcast. So, what we're really seeing is, on paper at least, in house can look simpler and it can look cheaper. But when you factor in risk, when you factor in the staffing and the long term sustainability, the picture really starts to change. And that's usually where companies hit a turning point. So the next question really becomes, how do you actually know which option is right for you? So let's talk about in house first. When does it make the most sense to stay in house or go to that model?
if there is a well seasoned, very experienced, a high skill level internal team, it usually makes sense to keep it in house. Also, as we spoke about on a previous podcast, if there's low turnover risk, that you're not going to lose that seasoned individual that knows that specific application and that cross training has been done. Um, that's usually when you want to keep it in house. Also, if you have a very simple environment, that's maybe you have a canned package that doesn't change, or there has been very few modifications to it, then also it can make sense to keep that in house. Also, if you keep it in house, you have to have the the budgeting already put in place for that additional training, for the security that has to be put in place. That can't be skipped on if you're going to keep it in house.
Yeah. You also have to be very proactive to make sure that you're backfilling these positions way before you need to. Because that's something that we talked about in the last pod of if you just react to someone getting to that retirement age, then there probably won't be enough time to get that training in house to really backfill that position in a smooth transition, at least. So, what are the signs that maybe outsourcing should be the better move?
One of the key indicators, at least, seems to be in the field that I'm in, is the gray hair. If you have a team that is close to that retirement age, you definitely should be looking at the managed services as a possibility to take over specific responsibilities. If hiring is an issue for you, or finding the right talent to hire, or retaining the talent that you have, you definitely should be looking at managed services. If your staff isn't big enough to be able to handle their responsibilities 24/7, or one person is trying to cover them nights and trying to cover them weekends also, but you really are overworking that employee, and should be looking at a managed service provider for that 24/7 coverage, and also the monitoring that they provide. If you're not able to handle or implement the right security processes to handle the never-ending security issues that happen every day. I mean, we have a whole staff that handles security, and the bullet points that they put out of they're looking at this CVE or this CVE that came out today, or it's a 0-day threat. I mean, we have a whole team that handles that kind of stuff. And if your team is not large enough to handle those on a day-to-day basis, or on a regular basis, then definitely should be looking at managed services.
Yeah. So, what would you say the biggest mistake is when companies are looking to make this decision?
I have a recent perfect example of this. It's a company that everybody would recognize their name, but they had a staff of two specific individuals. One was their administrator slash programmer, and the other one was a programmer slash BA. And the company knew that both of them were close to retirement, but they both gave their notification at the beginning of the year. So they more or less lost uh, the two guys that knew everything about a specific ERP application for this company within about 3 months' time. So if you wait too long to act, like in this case, it was very detrimental to that company, and then they're scrambling to be able to backfill that, and um, it 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 turned out okay. But you don't want to be in that situation where you can't cover your application on a day-to-day basis. So don't assume everything's stable and wonderful. I can be proactive, to ask those questions and find out, yes, should I be researching to see if a managed service provider is the right solution for you. Also, don't wait until there's something fails, or there's an outage or something. Be proactive and reach out and see what other options are out there for you.
Yeah. And assessments are something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, but also as an entire organization. It won't hurt because it will maybe just bring up pain points that you maybe didn't know were there. And that doesn't mean that you have to go outsourcing. You can stay in house, but it'll just give you a more complete look of where your shortcomings are with your IBMI. So, is this like an all or nothing decision? Do you have to go fully outsource or fully in house, or is there something in between?
There is about every flavor of of outsourcing. I'll give you a couple examples. One specific customer that we perform some services for, their administrator every year that they go on vacation, we cover for usually about 4 weeks a year. We cover everything for them. So you can look at that flavor where we're just covering to give that backfill so that employee can have their time off. We have customers that we only cover from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning. So we cover 2 shifts of the day because that administrator, of course, has to have a life too, right? But then we have customers that we do everything for. So we host the systems in-house. We take care of all DR tests, all DR events. We take care of the operating system. We take care of that ERP application. So, and also if that ERP application is upgraded, we take care of that. So there's every flavor you can think of. Oh, another example is the customer that has that in-house hardware, but they have, lost that administrator or they need additional coverage, where we'll actually manage that physical piece of hardware in their data center, possibly also the operating system and possibly the application. So there is 100 different flavors or options for you when it comes to this.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, there's so much flexibility in this where it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You're right. The working from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m., that seems like a perfect in between of, yes, you're maybe not doing any major upgrades during that time. Maybe you just need monitoring. There's so much flexibility of what outsourcing can truly look like where it's not taking away your control. But the biggest takeaway here is it isn't really about in-house versus outsourcing being right or wrong. It's about understanding your risk, your team, and even your ability to support the system long term. 'Cause that's what it's all about. And most companies don't make this decision until they're forced to. But the ones that get ahead of it are the ones that stay in true control of their business. But if you're trying to figure out whether your IBMI environment is better suited for in house management or outsourcing, ERP Suites can help you evaluate that. We'll look at your current setup, identify gaps, and help you build a strategy that fits your business. Head over to erpsuites.com to sign up for an assessment today and get started. But that's a wrap on today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. If you remember one thing from today, it's this decision isn't about preference. It's about preparedness. Because the real risk isn't IBMI, it's how it's being managed. But until next time, stay proactive, stay informed, and don't mistake stability for security. We'll catch you next time.